In 1944, in the cold mountains of Finland, one of the most unusual events of World War II happened. Back then, the Finns were in the middle of a bitter struggle against the Soviet Union, which wanted to gobble up their territory. Defending troops patrolled the vast forests and rugged snowy terrain in search of communist invaders, an arduous task that involved skiing hundreds of miles. The young soldier Aimo Koivunen was part of one of these military reconnaissance units, and he is the one who would become the protagonist of a surreal adventure. Suddenly, when they were resting, Aimo and his comrades were startled by the sound of guns being fired. The enemy was on the prowl, and they were the prey. The Finns gathered their gear, strapped on their skis, and headed into a frozen forest, narrowly escaping death. Behind them, a Soviet squad was chasing them through the trees. The defenders had the advantage of knowing the terrain like the back of their hand, since it was their own country, while the invaders were foreigners and not entirely familiar with the Finnish landscape. However, the communists outnumbered them, and after a while, Aimo felt exhaustion taking over his body. He was tired, he no longer had the strength to continue skiing, soon his muscles would give way or he would have a cramp. The Russians would catch up with him and that would be the end for him. Suddenly, the young man remembered that, inside his pocket, he kept something that could save his life. Desperate and on the verge of a nervous breakdown, he reached his frozen hand into his coat and pulled out a vial. It was a risky plan, but it was the only thing he could do, his life hung by a thread. Do not move from your screen, because in the next few minutes, we will tell you the story of Aimo Koivunen, the first soldier of World War II who overdosed on methamphetamine. To understand this story, we have to go back to the year 1939. At the same time that Adolf Hitler set out to conquer Europe, Joseph Stalin seized the opportunity to invade Finland. The Soviet Union had had its eyes on this nation for a long time, and came to the conclusion that it was the ideal moment to conquer it. After all, the Western Allies were too busy fighting the Third Reich to have neither the time nor the resources to help the Finns. This was how the brutal Winter War broke out, which lasted until March 1940, when, after a heroic resistance, the invaded nation had to capitulate. The peace agreement involved ceding 10% of its territory to the communists, something that was seen as a shame. The war with Finland had shown the Red Army to be highly ineffective and disorganized. It was for this reason, among others, that Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded the Soviet Union. The Finns, seeing that this was the moment to take revenge, allied themselves with the Germans and participated in the expedition against the communist country, with the aim of recovering the lost territory. For years the battlefront remained open, although by 1944 it was clear that the Soviets had the upper hand. They prepared an offensive that led them deep into Finland, where the defending army had no choice but to adapt to guerrilla maneuvers and sabotage. The protagonist of this story, Aimo Koivunen, was born in Finland on October 17, 1917. He participated in the Winter War, where he reached the rank of sergeant, and in 1944, when he was 27 years old, he was recruited to serve in the new conflict, this time in a military patrol unit. As we told you at the beginning of this video, on March 18th of that year, Aimo and a few comrades were in the middle of a mission taking a break. They were in a forest clearing, surrounded by snow, believing that there was no danger around them, when suddenly they were surprised by a Soviet platoon. In the ensuing chase, Aimo fell behind his companions, realizing that he was about to pass out from exhaustion. He skied as fast as he could, but his enemies, who were behind him chasing him with rifles in hand, were faster. Fearing the worst, the young man took a bottle full of methamphetamine pills from his pocket. Nazi Germany had given this drug to the Finnish army to improve the performance of its troops. Methamphetamine is a stimulant capable of suppressing feelings of physical and mental exhaustion and hunger. This is achieved through an increase in adrenaline and dopamine in the brain, thus making the patient euphoric and aggressive. However, too high a dose is capable of generating all kinds of mental disorders. Aimo took the pills from the bottle, but the poor night lighting, added to the cold that had stiffened his fingers, caused them to fall to the floor. Overwhelmed and filled with fear, he picked up the drugs from the ground, quickly put them in his mouth and swallowed them all at once. The young man had swallowed 30 pills, that is, the entire supply of the patrol unit. He kept going, and after a few moments, he caught up with his companions, moving ahead of the group and leading the way. Immediately, the others noticed that there was something strange in the young man's gaze. He was absent but hyperactive at the same time, wasting energy and skiing as if he were an Olympic athlete. They finally left the Soviets behind, but Aimo's situation was getting worse. He talked to people who were not there, holding lively talks with the air. At a certain moment, he pointed to the sky and announced that his duty was to chase the North Star, although no one knew how or for what reason. His comrades, alarmed by his condition, decided to take his weapons and ammunition. Aimo was still lost in his hallucinations, raving and speaking incoherently. When the others weren't looking, he closed his eyes and tried to go to sleep. He regained consciousness the next morning, separated from his patrol and lost in the middle of nowhere, for while he believed he was sleeping, he had traveled 100 kilometers without stopping to rest. The drug was still working, and the 30 pills made him feel like he could face any threat and come out unscathed. He was making his way through the snow without food or ammunition, but none of that mattered to him. Aimo Koivunen felt like the most powerful man in the world. The only food he got was a bird that had the bad luck to land near him. The young man killed it with a ski hit and ate it raw. After a few hours, he saw a small camp in the distance, where there were men in tents. It was night and there was a heavy snowstorm raging and making it difficult to see. Our protagonist entered the site, convinced that it was a Finnish base, but he soon realized his mistake. The language they spoke there was Russian. Realizing that he was standing in the middle of a Red Army camp, he turned and ran. Some soldiers realized that there was an intruder and went out in search of him, but the strong blizzard caused them to lose track of him. Days passed and Aimo was still lost in nature, numb with cold and hunger. When it seemed that things could not get worse, the boy stepped on a mine that exploded and mutilated his foot. He was left lying on the ground for a full week, badly injured, surviving by drinking melted snow. By chance, a Finnish patrol reconnoitering the terrain found him and immediately took him to a military hospital. He looked like a walking corpse. He was dirty and emaciated, had lost 90 pounds, was missing a toe, and his heart rate was 200 beats per minute. In total, he had traveled 450 kilometers in temperatures of -7 degrees. Fortunately for Aimo, the rest of his life was peaceful and quiet. Doctors saved him. He survived the methamphetamine-generated psychotic episode and was discharged from the army. At the end of the war, he started a family and stayed in Finland, where he died in 1989, at the age of 71. We have reached the end of the video. Leave us your comment in the tray below and do not forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.